Okay, so today's notes are going to be section 3.7, which is total fertility rate. Okay, so total fertility rate is the average number of children that a woman in any population will bear throughout her lifetime. So, for instance, I ended up having two children. Excuse me. So that would be my total fertility rate. All right. A higher total fertility rate equals a higher birth rate. Obviously, if women are having more children, then the fertility rate will be increased and the number of births in a population will increase as well. Okay. And so countries, in order to stay stable, look at their adults having a replacement level fertility. This is the total fertility rate that's required to offset the deaths in a population. This just keeps the population very stable. So where the shape of the age structure diagram would be kind of around, like straight up and down throughout the population, throughout the lifespan or throughout the age cohorts. All right, and in developed countries, the replacement level fertility rate is about 2.1. This is what replaces both mom and dad in a family. It's very higher, the replacement level fertility is higher in less developed countries because there generally tends to be, because of poor living conditions, less access to healthcare, there tends to be a higher infant mortality rate, which is the number of babies that die prior to the age of one. That rate happens to be a lot higher in developing countries. Okay, so again, infant mortality rate, number of deaths of children under 1 year, so up to the age of one per 1,000 people in a population. That's what the IMR is, or the total infant mortality rate. Again, we've already talked about it being higher in less developed countries. A higher IMR equals a higher total fertility rate due to families having like those replacement children. So in other words, in a country that has a high that has a high infant mortality rate, they end up having more children, and that means that total fertility rate is going to increase. Okay, so total fertility rate is the number of children that a woman actually has. It's irregardless of whether that baby dies or not. Uh, so if I had unfortunately had a miscarriage or anything, I didn't. But if I had, I would have actually had more. My total fertility rate for myself would have been higher. So. Okay, but total fertility rate is the average across all women. You don't just look at one woman; you add up all of those uh, born children, um, and then take the average based on how many women are in the population. Okay, so crude rates. We have two different types of crude rates. Crude rates are always listed as per 1,000 people. So a crude birth rate is the number of births that occur per 1,000 people. The crude death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 people. Scientists use these crude rates to understand population growth and to make predictions about the future. All right, population scientists specifically use that birth rate, that crude birth rate, to predict a country's future population. And then from that, they can develop those socioeconomic strategies. So we talked about that being true with those population age structure diagrams. And they also use crude birth rate to help out or give a complete picture of what types of resources that a country might need. Okay, so those are very important numbers, and we will do some calculations based on crude birth rates and crude death rates. Here's our global total fertility rates throughout the world. You can kind of see those. So as we get to those darker colors, that's the number of children, that the average number of children that women are bearing in these different countries. So you can see the US is here between 0. It's probably more that 1 to 2. So on average, women are bearing anywhere between 1 and 2 children. I'm sure it's probably like 1.4 or something like that. But they're bearing between 1 and 2 children on average per female. In Central America, you can see it's a little higher. And then South America kind of has more, a little bit higher total fertility rate if we were to look at all of South America. You can see here Asia with this high area here. Middle East, Africa, you can see it being the highest. That's still the area where there's the most developing countries. Australia is similar to the US, Canada, Brazil, and Russia, Europe kind of numbers. And then over here we have infant mortality. I think when we look at these world maps, we should be able to understand areas where there's a high total fertility rate and a high infant mortality rate. So Africa is going to be high for both of those. Um, Obviously, some of these less developed areas, like China, has a lot of less has some developing parts. India, parts of South America. Okay, so the U.S. has its infant mortality is around 6.6 per 1,000. Again, that's like a crude value, and then the global rate is actually 49 per 1,000 births. So it's much higher. The U.S. we have great infant mortality data. So that's really good to see because of our advanced healthcare system. Okay, we're very lucky and fortunate here. All right, so factors in infant mortality rate decline. You would have a lower infant mortality rate if there's access to clean water, if there's access to healthcare. Like I said, the United States just has superior hospitals, vaccines, vitamins, and supplements that we take for moms and babies. Women that are pregnant always have to take a prenatal vitamin that has a lot of folic acid, which helps to reduce the risk of the baby being born with a birth defect. Also, a reliable food supply is important for the health of the mother. So, all of these things contribute to infant mortality and that total fertility rate. Okay, moving on. Factors that affect that total fertility rate also include not just the healthcare piece, but also the affluence of a country. So wealthier nations tend to have a lower total fertility rate than less developed nations. This goes hand in hand with the educational access and the education level of the women. Women that are more educated tend to have fewer children. That's not always the case, but in general, that's how that works. That's what the data shows. And then more economic opportunity for women tends to mean that the total fertility rate is less. Higher access to family planning, education, and contraception. Those are all really important for having a lower total fertility rate. The later age of first pregnancy, so more educated women tend to start having babies later or at an older age. So therefore, that keeps that total fertility rate lower. And then because we have a technologically advanced country, we no longer are living in an agricultural period where we need more children to provide income through that agricultural labor. So, if you're not a developing nation where you're growing a lot of crops and you need people to help support the family, then you tend to have fewer children as well. Plus, it's more expensive in developed nations to have more children. So, anyway, so government policy can also play a factor in this. The very famous example was China's previous one-child policy. I believe it's now a two-child policy, but that can play a huge role in fertility by forcing or encouraging policies. So we can either have coercive or forceful policies, or non-coercive or encouraging policies. And this can even lead to things like forced or voluntary sterilization. So after you have one child, you become sterilized, so you can't have any more. And then tax incentives to have fewer children, credits or loans to women without children to actually start businesses. So all of these factors are kind of points of or factors that reduce that total fertility rate. Okay, Affluence and TFR. So more access to contraception and family planning is another thing that we talked about. Those educational opportunities, that lower infant mortality rate. And you can kind of see the births per women per income level. So as income level decreases, the number of births decreases. It just goes hand in hand. Lower income, more babies. Higher income, less babies. Female education, more education. You can see we're up here at the top with Germany, Taiwan, Spain, US, Israel. Fewer average year of schooling, and then children. So children is on the y-axis, so it's going to be less. And same thing here, more children with less schooling. All right. All right, and then comparing population pyramids, we've already talked about this, but it actually influences the that total fertility rate, just to kind of show you when we look at those pre-reproductive years. China having their 1 and 2 child policy. Now it says here they've actually now in 2021 moved to a 3-child policy. So you can see, because they were concerned that their young people wouldn't be able to support their old people, that they've actually raised that policy so that they can now have 3 children. But you can see how it very much impacted their population pyramid versus a country such as India, where they didn't have those policies in place. And then look at how their country is just starting to slow its growth, but it was rapidly expanding and overtook China actually as having the most people. So they reached 1 billion shortly after, and then exceeded China's numbers of population not too long ago. So, and then you can look at the US, Japan, Africa, Europe. Again, you can go back and read through some of these numbers. You can pause it and sort of look at some of these rates. It's got some interesting data on that infographic over those 2 slides. Okay, so we are at the end of our notes today. So here's your practice FRQ. You're going to identify and discuss 2 of the causes for the trend in worldwide total fertility rate. So look at that trend and then identify. So state what those 2 causes are, and then discuss or explain the trend. Okay. All right. I think that's it. If you have any questions, make sure you're talking to me in class, and I'll see you next time. Next time, we're going to be talking about human population dynamics. See y'all later.